Hello, everyone. Hi, and welcome. This is Echolocation, and this is a joint podcast, quite an interesting project. It's run together by K News in Georgia and DS in Moldova and Global Pod in Stockholm, Sweden. And I'm David Isaacson. I'm the Swedish person in this collaboration of the three media organizations. And we are starting out in our second round. We did a couple of, we could say, call them pilot episodes, trying to find our forms. And now we are working together. And we think it's kind of great to be doing podcasts together because connecting the countries which doesn't have that much connection. And of course, we have in a situation, we all know that with the war in Ukraine, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, that has created a lot of tension in the region and has changed a lot of things in the politics. So our aim with the Echolocation podcast is to connect the societies and connect young people in the three countries and the discussion topics that we think are really relevant. And today we are head on with the super topic, I would say, LGBT rights. Old men, why are they so afraid of pride? Or maybe we should say old white men in some countries. So this is what we're going to discuss today. And I have three great people with me. I have one Swede, that is Gustav Åhlén, who is currently in the restaurant business. You are from the island of Gotland, and you currently live in Stockholm now. And I have Tamar Tamar, you have to correct me, Kapanadze. You are working with Tbilisi Pride in Georgia, and we will talk a little more about Tbilisi and the Pride because there was a lot of things happening in 2021. And then Leo Zbanke, who is film director, screenwriter, and a lot of other things from Moldova. You are activist in Genderdoc. You have to tell us a little bit more about that a little bit later on. So thanks a lot, all of you, for joining us here. So why don't we start in Georgia? Tamar, tell us a little bit. I mentioned the Tbilisi Pride in 2021 and what actually happened then.
Nice having this chance to talk with your audience. So let's start with Tbilisi Pride and the violent attack by ultra-right groups on LGBTQ activists and media. But before we do that, I think it will be useful for your audience to have a little bit of overview and backstory of Tbilisi Pride, which is an LGBTQ organization working in Georgia, Tbilisi-based one, and we are the proud organizers of Georgia's March for Dignity and generally Pride Week. We've started our work in 2019. So in 2021, last year, exactly this period, now it's a 1-year anniversary of that, we've been organizing this traditional annual Pride Week in Georgia, in Tbilisi, and then we had 3 separate events. 2 of them, actually, the movie screening and the Tbilisi Pride Festival went pretty smoothly. And then on the 5th of July, we've been planning the March for Dignity with LGBTQ community, allies, supporters together in the center of Tbilisi and have this march. Actually, March for Dignity and generally Pride marches in the countries like Georgia, it's not necessarily a celebration. It's more of a fight for visibility, for our freedoms, freedom of expressions, freedom of free gathering and manifestation. And in the morning of 5th of July, ultra-right conservative groups, Russian-financed, Kremlin-backed, church-endorsed, and also government-supported ultra-right groups took over the main avenue of the city, and then they've been violently attacking everyone who was on the avenue at that time, mostly media, and then also they've been chasing us, LGBTQI activists and organizers of Tbilisi Pride, basically all around the city, exposed in all our location, and we've been really under danger of that. More than 55 media representatives been attacked, physically injured, and one TV operator after the attack, several days after, he died. So this was one of the most tragic, one of the most violent experiences we ever encountered in the modern history of Georgia. It was a huge attack on LGBTQ community, on the freedom of our expression, freedom of gathering and demonstration, and we still trying to cope with that. Another thing is that these ultra-right groups called Altinfo, they basically planned all the attack on live TV because they have their own TV channel broadcasting in Georgia, and they've been openly expressing their aggression and saying that they won't allow LGBTQ people to march on the main avenue of the city.
What was the reaction from ordinary citizens in Georgia? Because they saw this and it came out in the media. What did ordinary people think about all this?
There was a lot of controversies, but what is very important, this attack showed that Georgian population as such, as a general population, is not homophobic, especially they are not going to chase people in the streets and attack them. It's just this several thousand group, Kremlin financed and inspired ideologically against us, who are the organizers of that. Otherwise, public being condemning their actions, just their supporters being happy with the outcome. Public, international community, our allies, everyone. But the thing is, government, and they still did not arrest nor prosecuted the organizers of this 5th of July pogrom, which is just devastating.
So you mean that there's nobody been put on trial for
there are some people who they put on trial, but they are mostly the ones who've been accused of attacking media, and then also they attacked Tbilisi Pride office. They basically demolished it almost. But the ones who've been the leaders of this pogrom and of this violent attack, they are still free and they still continue their work and their life, and they are still threatening Tbilisi Pride.
You mentioned the Kremlin connection, but why would Russia be interested in attacking a pride manifestation, attacking media in Tbilisi?
War in Ukraine exposed their real face, that they are not these family value protector guys, but they are absolutely openly pro-Russian. They've been saying that the war in Ukraine will be finished after 3 days and the Kyiv will fall. But Russia's interest is that there's this soft power, so-called propaganda. And in Russia, it's openly stated and it's law and it's criminalized homosexuality. And the law says that liberal values, feminism, queer activism, it's against their national values, and it means that they are taking their national identity for them, and they also want to spread them in their neighborhood, being it in Ukraine, in Georgia, in Moldova, or any other countries. And those alt-info groups and other ultra-rights, they are just basically an instrument in their hand to also spread their propaganda in neighborhood countries like Georgia.
I see, Leon, that you are nodding. What is the situation in your country, Moldova? You also have a large Russian-speaking population. You have this breakout republic, Transnistria, where I actually have been, and we have talked about that in the previous episode or podcast also. But what is the situation in Moldova?
Thank you, David, for this opportunity to speak. I was nodding because, of course, Georgia and Moldova has a lot of common past and some issues that we inherited from Soviet period. I would say that the situation in Moldova is a bit different, although it's not going so far away, but because we have right now a parliament and a president who is pro-European and progressist, the things are going a bit better than it was before, when the communists were in power. The interesting thing is that when Tamar was speaking about this horrible situation and tragic event that happened last year, I was thinking that in Moldova, in Genderdoc-M, we had the same thing, very similar thing happened in 2008. So if I start from the beginning, after Soviet Union collapsed, and in 1995, the homosexual relationships were decriminalized. In 1998, Genderdoc was established as an organization. That time it was a group of gay men fighting for their rights, and then later they included lesbians, bisexuals, and transgender people in this fight. And from 2013, Genderdoc tried from 2000s to organize a pride. The first Pride Fest was in 2001, but it was a festival at closed events, very good protected events. And when in 2008, Genderdoc decided to try and do a march, they were attacked. People didn't even went out of the bus. They went with the bus to make a small march in the square, and the bus was attacked with thousands of people, and the police was just nearby watching. So it was all orchestrated by police and the government to scare the LGBTQ community. From that time, many things changed. From 2013, Genderdoc started organizing prides every single year, and there were some attacks, throwing eggs and stones and other things, and blocking the way, and so on. And from 2018 was the third year when the march in Chisinau was held peacefully. And this year was the historical visibility march in Moldova because it was the longest and the biggest number of participants. More than 500 people went on the street and marched, and it was peaceful.
So would you say then that the attitude among people in Moldova has changed over these years, that people have matured, especially I guess young people, for them everything is normal. They don't really care about what kind of sexual orientation you have?
Yeah, I think there is a generational change, or at least I would like to believe that it will change. And because there is a new generation and shift in attitudes toward LGBTQ community, young people in Moldova travel more freely, they see other countries, they communicate, they're more open. Genderdoc makes study on attitudes in Moldovan society regarding LGBTQ community. The first study was made in 2019, and it showed that 33% of population of Chisinau, unfortunately, we have only stats about the capital and not the whole country. But in Chisinau in 2019, there was 33% of population who was okay, let's say, neutral or positive about LGBTQ community. And in 2022, we have 55% of Chisinau people who are pro, let's say, LGBTQ rights, which is an incredible result if we think about the fact that it's only 2 years and it's 22% increase. So let's hope it will go like this. And I think it's mostly because of change of generations. And also the fight that we're making and the educational effort we're putting in combating prejudices and stereotypes regarding LGBTQ community in Moldova.
So maybe things are going faster have been then compared to Sweden. Because if we move to Sweden, Gustav, Sweden, I mean, it's always a rosy picture. Sweden, we are so liberal, LGBT rights, women rights, we are so much into environmental issues. But from your perspective, is it really that rosy this picture, or is it more complicated?
It's exactly as you say, because when I came out to my friends, nobody really cared. It was very easy, no problems at all. It was more like a problem, or not a problem, but when I came out to my family, because then it was like these real questions about, I'm getting are you getting children? Like my mother, she was worried about these things, and she was not really exactly like happy when I told this. But after some years, it was no problem. I had no problem with my grandparents, and I never had any problems at all, really, with this one.
So things are really relatively smooth. But have you encountered any problem in Sweden, or in some situations where you feel unsafe, or that you feel that, okay, I have a very, very low profile here, or can I talk with people in my job about?
Like, I'm not that person that tell everyone that I'm gay. But when I do, there's no problem. Like, I came out to my job, and my chiefs, they are like Muslims and from Turkey. And first I thought like, okay, will I miss my job? Will they fire me? How will this end up? But no, there were no problems at all. And we have 2 guys who works at us, who comes from Georgia. And I thought in the beginning that they were going to be a little afraid of me, but not at all. It was easy, like they're under 30 years old. And I think it's like what you're thinking about before, that this is a generation thing, but really like never a problem.
In the Pride, and some people have been maybe in Sweden been a bit critical, saying that Pride just become like a fashion event or something that everybody wants to be in. Must be in the most recent Pride before the pandemic, we had the Swedish commander-in-chief. He was going with the Pride, and I think he was singing an Elvis song. Good, quite a good singer, actually. Would that happen in Moldova or Georgia? What do you think, Tamar? Would you have your commander-in-chief going in the Pride, maybe in the future?
Absolutely not. Not yet. The thing is, as I've mentioned, in countries like Georgia, Pride marches, they are not necessarily celebration. They are more of a fight. And the so-called pinkwashing now, Scandinavian or other countries are fighting against, saying that companies are taking over the LGBT legacy and this. It's not happening in here. For us, it's so important to find allies in the business sector.
So you would like to have pink washing in some way, so to speak.
No.
At least you would like to have the companies with you, right?
No, yeah, but famous restaurants and cafes in Tbilisi, they displayed LGBTQ, like a rainbow flags, which was a huge support. But then these cafes and restaurants, they got a huge backlash. There was this ultra-right conservative community members who've been patrolling around these cafes, trying to take down these flags. Same happens every time, because on our office balcony, we have this huge flag. So we don't want pinkwashing in Georgia, but we want that at some point Pride from just fighting kind of also to become celebration. For example, this year, Pride Week goes smoother, I would say. A lot of ambassadors and international organization leaders who are working in Georgia and based in Georgia, they are a huge supporter and allies for us, for our organization and generally LGBTQI movement and community in Georgia, which helps a lot, I guess.
In Moldova, then, what is the situation with pinkwashing? Do you have companies that actually do support the Pride or the LGBT movement, or are they still too afraid of doing that?
Yeah, we have quite a similar situation with Georgia because the patriarchy is still very much in place in our countries, and LGBT phobia is a political weapon most of the time. That's why many companies don't want to be associated with LGBTQ community, and even those who are willing to help during the Pride, for example, and are supporting but don't want to show their logo or somehow show it publicly that they are supporting LGBTQ rights. However, also we have ambassadors who are coming to the Pride, and this year there were 6 deputies from the ruling party who were present on the Pride March because, as I said before, we have a new government that is pro-European and more open. And at the same time, maybe they will not say directly that they are supporting out loud because there are still consequences. But the fact that they came to the Pride and they were, of course, photographed and everyone knows that they were at the Pride, this is a big change.
I know, Gustav, you have been involved in politics before, even though you're maybe not so much at the moment. But what is the situation with the Swedish political parties? Are all parties supporting LGBT rights, or are some parties against it, or neutral?
I would say mostly all the Swedish parties are pro-liberal in this mind. But then maybe we have like the far-right party, which is maybe more neutral. But I would say even today, they're not against it, but they're not like pro, but more neutral. Sweden is very like liberal, as you told before, very open. I can't say that any of the Swedish parties are like against LGBTQ. So it's really a paradise compared to the other countries.
It wasn't like this 30, 40 years ago, right?
No, really. It really has happened a lot in the past years. When you sometimes talk with older people, you end up like it's not the same thing as talking with younger people, but still it's not like really homophobic. Even if you're young or old, it's almost the same thing. People support you because either if you're gay or a woman, you have the same rights here. And we're very open with everything. Like I met some homophobic people like when I was younger, but after they ended up like, oh, why should I hate gay people? Like you're gay and I don't hate you. So I changed the mind of like some friends that I have, like from not hating but have some issues with gay people.
Starting with you, Tamar, talking in the families or with relatives, are they afraid, or what are they saying? Well, they say also saying, like Gustav's mother was saying, oh, but I won't have any grandchildren. But this will be the major problem. You're laughing. But tell me.
Of course, Georgian mothers are very worried that they won't have any grandchildren, but that's not an issue, actually. Now we try in Tbilisi Pride to raise awareness about that. So we have a project, Proud Families, where we connect family members of queer people with each other for them to have a more of a supportive mechanism and group. And also we have a big online campaign, I Used to Be a Homophobe, where people, ordinary people or more famous people are sharing their experience of being homophobic and then what changed it. But still in Georgia, coming out, even with your family, it's really difficult and comes with different obstacles and problems. Of course, you can be open in some more queer-friendly environment. There are a lot of amazing nightclub culture, which is very inclusive. There's bars and news places. But families sometimes, after the child is forced to come out or just decides to come out, they sometimes even force them to leave the family, and there is a housing problems coming with that and other social and economic issues. But during the pandemic, it was even worse because queer people been basically stuck at their houses with their families who are sometimes homophobic, especially like the extended family and not just parents. And because Georgia is still a pretty patriarchal society, as Leo mentioned before about Moldova, these traditions and family values sometimes even overcome the love of your child. And another thing is that people are afraid what would other people say, and because homophobia is still in the society and there's a lot of stereotypes and a lot of prejudices towards queer people, coming out is not as easy as maybe in Sweden and Scandinavia, but we try to slowly change it, and more people like Gen Z, younger generation, they are more vocal, they are more outspoken, and I really hope to finish it on a more positive note that slowly we can turn this picture around and make families more accepting to their children.
And what did your family say?
I can't talk about my experience about that, but I have friends whose families are absolutely supportive, and especially parents who are involved in our project. They are so amazing. And on Tbilisi Pride Festival, we had this hug a parent thing when some parents, they disown their children after coming out and they don't have a parent figure in their life. And the mothers who are more accepting, they are offering hugs. It's a pretty common practice around. So I think that's important process. And also there is this generational gap, because for younger people, it's easier to understand it. And for elder generation, like my parents' generation, my grandparents' generation, there is so much more stereotypical thinking, and also they don't know what to expect when their child comes out as gay. And another problem is that they are really afraid for their children to live in a society like Georgia, where people like this ultra-right people from Altinfo, they can basically attack their children in the streets. And that's why they won't maybe even prefer for them to be closeted at some point.
There's a security kind of thing then. And what about Moldova, Leo? What are their parents' reaction?
I would try to tackle more problems here. I see here the lack of information meets resistance. What I see many times, especially as a trainer, because we are doing training courses in sexual orientation and gender identity for specialists in Genderdoc-M. And when I came to a training course, we have a group of 20 psychologists or endocrinologists of police workers, so many people from professionals that should support all types of diverse types of people and interact with LGBTQ community. And I see that they still have these ideas from the past, like being gay is an illness. And as a psychologist, like specialists in psychology, telling us that we started in university that being gay is an illness, and they still remain with this prejudice although they are supposed to be specialists. I would say that main problems are Soviet heritage, where it was criminalized to be homosexual, and it's still, we are 30 years after the Soviet Union collapsed. The social prejudices, they are not changing so quickly, so many people are afraid of gay people because they had these ideas. There is also penitentiary institution and the myths about sexual conduct and sexual orientation being the same thing. There is patriarchy, there is Orthodox Church, politicians who are doing their jobs using LGBT for gaining some votes. And all this creates the situation when older generation, let's say, people who do not have access to internet or do not have, let's say, the habit to go and search for alternative information, they are stuck in these myths and these narratives. My mother never accepted me. And very often when I do these SOGI trainings for specialists, I make this coming out and tell my own story, because as you said, David, it's very important for people to know at least one transgender person, one gay person, and so on. And when they ask me about my parents, I say, yes, of course, it's been 20 years since my mom knows about me, and she still didn't accept me. And it is quite common situation for everyone. It's very rare stories of acceptance from the parents that I hear, especially being a coordinator of group for supporting transgender people. It is like this, and we should keep working, keep informating, and fighting against these prejudices that are so much entangled in the common narrative.
I think interesting you're saying this with psychologists. Actually, in Sweden until 1979, which is very recently, homosexuality was seen as a disease, mental illness. So there was a huge protest by the gay right movements, and in 1978 that they went to what is the Swedish Authority of Social Policies, one could say, and protested. And then the law was changed afterwards, actually, or the regulations.
Until 1990, it was officially in all the books as mentioned as a mental illness. So it's still fresh.
Gustav, from your perspective, what advice would you be giving to young people and to the organizations in the other countries? How should one talk with the parents, or who should talk with the parents?
This is hard, but start to talk with one of the parents that you trust the most. It's a hard thing to come out, and it's not as easy to say, like, it's really between families, but try to do it when you feel comfortable about it and be yourself. But still, it's the hardest thing in the gay community to do, but it shouldn't be it. It was very easy for me, but it can be very hard. But just take the perfect opportunity, and maybe if you can wait, do it. But as long as you feel comfortable about it.
So how important is it to have your friends with you when you're coming out? Did you have like a supporting group of friends that knew that you were going to come out officially or publicly? Or how did it work for you?
I was in the beginning coming out to my friends. Like, I don't remember if it was a year before I came out to my parents, but start to come out to your friends, so you have someone who can back up, like support you. If your parents like are not supporting you, so you have someone who you can trust on and play on. And maybe you have also other people you can talk with. Maybe your grandparents are like okay with this. Then you can talk with them. If they are not, you shouldn't talk with them. Then you can start with your parents, but always come out to your friends, because you're in the same generation, and it's so much better to have them with you, because it's a hard thing to do, this thing to come out. So start with your friends, and after you can see with your parents.
But do you actually need to come out? Some people I know, they would never come out publicly in anything. They would just be themselves. The question to all of you then maybe, but to Gustav first, like, do you really need to go public?
I know this is an issue, because I've been talking with my friends, like LGBT friends, and they are saying like, oh, you shouldn't come out, because why should you come out? You don't come out as a straight person. But still, I think today, when it's not that easy to be a gay person, you have to come out because that's the way it is.
Tamar, you were laughing. I saw that, even though you didn't have your microphone on. You had to put it on now. But how do you really? It becomes a strong statement, especially in a society like Georgia.
I'm a big believer in visibility policy. That's why I believe that every person being proudly themselves can help another people. And for me, it comes that what we do in Tbilisi Pride, it's so important because being out and proud gives a hope. Maybe younger people living all around Georgia, all around the world, in the rural societies, in the cities, and they think that they are alone and they think that there is something wrong with them. And for them, knowing that there are people like them, so-called, and that these people are amazing members of society and they are who they are, even though there are so many obstacles to overcome, it gives them the hope. So I think that coming out, it's more of a political act than just a saying that I'm part of queer community. Of course, it's everyone's individual choice, but I think that it's still important step and it's still a very important statement, especially in countries like Georgia. And it's not a very easy step and it's not a very difficult choice to make. But now, as we see more and more out and proud queer people around us, it gives me more of a hope and also more of a bigger image of how many queer people are out there who we are not ready, but now are getting closer to that process. And that's a very important process.
But can you give advice to people in Georgia on how to come out? Would you then be accused of subverting or leading them into bad ways, or is that?
It's difficult. I can't give any advice. Backlash would be expecting, online bullying, these mental things, pressure. But still, I can say from our organization's experience that being outspoken queer activists also helps other people. Even not coming out as a LGBTQI person, but coming out as a ex-homophobe, saying that you used to be a homophobe, that takes a bravery in Georgia. So maybe we can start from there and go farther. Like, as I see this process, saying that homophobia, it's a shame and it's shameful and it needs to be stopped at one point or another. And then I also believe in ally and this allyship as such, because in countries like this, when majority is not ready to be outspoken, these amazing queer allies can also be a good support system. I don't have any advice. I just wish that this process to be more peaceful and easier and smoother and easier on people's psychological health also.
And what, as Gustav was saying, what do you think? Is that a good idea when you are coming out? Have your friends with you, that you have a strong backup?
Yeah, absolutely. It's so important, and especially having your family and having your family having your back, because sometimes in Georgia, some people try to use your gender identity or sexual orientation to blackmail you, and not just in Georgia. And when you are out with your family, when you are out with your friend and you have this support system behind your back, you are not afraid to be exposed by someone and to be forced to come out, which happens a lot all around the world.
Leo, what is your thinking? How to do it in Moldova?
I would say, first of all, that this narrative about should we or shouldn't we come out comes from another place, like another time when we are all equal. But in our society, when we live in a heteronormative society, and everyone by default, when you are born, and by default you're gender and hetero, you have to come out. Yeah, we are put in this strange position that we should say, no, actually, I'm not hetero and I'm not cisgender, which would be entirely different if our society would just accept the fact that we are all different, and you cannot tell when a person is born their gender identity and sexual orientation and put this label from the very beginning. In this regard, of course, the coming out process is something that we have to go through. Some of us do it as a political statement and saying, yes, I know how important it is to be visible and to say, yeah, I'm here, we exist as a community, we exist, and we are the same as everyone else. But at the same time, it is also important because it is damaging for health and our psychology, mental health, to lead this double life when you never ever say about your personal life and you have to lie and pretend and try to, even, when we do come out, very often now in our countries, we choose very careful to whom to come out. So we live in these situations where some friends know and some friends don't know. Some people from family knows and other parts are clueless. And then you just mentally live in a constant nightmare of trying to remember what to say to whom and not to mess up. And yes, so you're living in this lie, basically, of course, to protect yourself from LGBT phobia in the society, to protect your relatives because they will also be victims and so on. And this raises one very serious question. We should fight with homophobia, transphobia, and biphobia. If this will not exist in our society, there will not be a big deal about coming out and saying who you are. And I would like to give here a very important advice for those who want to come out in Moldova or in any other country. It is the same. It's very important to come out when you're ready. Because, of course, like me, I chose many years ago this life of LGBT activist, and I'm privileged in a way to be visible and speak with you and not to be afraid of consequences. I have a job, I'm a financial independent, and so on. I know many people in LGBTQ community for whom coming out can be a disaster. Remain homeless and without sources of existence and so on. So coming out is very important. When people come to us in an organization, especially young people, especially teenagers, say, should I tell my parents or not? We always say, we cannot decide for you, but please be careful. Do it in the right moment if you know exactly what will be the consequences of this decision, because it can be very, very bad for the person.
Do you mean that you really need to, in such a situation, need to rethink, okay, what will I do if my parents say out through the door tomorrow? You really need to think in those terms.
For your own security. Unfortunately, we should always think about our security, and we should kind of measure what is the biggest danger. My mental health, because I'm lying all the time and pretending and I cannot create a family and so on. And my security as a person, my integrity of my life. And in our countries, unfortunately, it is still a very big question. Which one is the most predominant and important?
Really terrible choice to do. For people who are outside of the movement, often talk about LGBT rights, but then we have Q and LGBTQI. And for people who are, I call them into question mark, decent heterosexual, who is then not knowing things, it could be kind of difficult to understand the situation.
Of course, it's difficult, but also it's so important for people, not just outside the queer community, but also inside, to be more aware of other people around them. And there's this jokes around that, there are so many letters, and there's this Twitter thread listing all the alphabet and saying that, oh my God, how come there's so many sexual identities? But I think other than that, it's so important for people to learn about other people and also to respect about other people. It's such an easy thing to ask for pronouns. It's such an easy thing to just make sure that people are feeling comfortable while talking with you. It doesn't take a lot of effort, so why not? This is always my approach. And in Georgia, in Tbilisi Pride, we still society is struggling even with LGBT. I'm not talking about Q, but we try inside the community to be more aware of non-binary, gender non-confirming people, gender fluid people, because especially younger generation, they are so fluid, they are so interesting, they are exploring their sexuality, and they are coming up with their own terms. So this is a really interesting, really amazing process to watch. And I believe that we will be able to learn all the LGBTQI plus and question mark letters and identities behind them soon.
Gustav, what do you think in a Swedish perspective? Are there too many letters, or just plain being who you are? Or is it important to actually to define? What do you think? Are we getting too much of this technical stuff, so to speak?
For me, it was always okay with like HBT, what we said in Sweden, like LGBT, like in Swedish, HBT, because I thought like everyone was with that, but today it's not even LGBTQ, it's I, and it's more letters. And like as a gay person, I can't know all of them. There's like too many. But yeah, people should be supported, but I think there's too many letters, and it can help gay people, yes. But does it help with like anti-gay, like the homophobic people to try to get inside this community? I wouldn't say so. I think like it helps maybe the gay community, but for the rest and to come out and everything about that, I think this doesn't make any sense and any help at all.
Maybe we should be careful with the letters. What do you think, Leo?
Yeah, I want to say that one very important thing to remind to all of us is that the terms and the concepts exist to define something. If there is no concept, there is no term for something that I feel, this feeling is being ignored. It doesn't exist. That's why we are constantly adding to our vocabulary. And, as a primitive being some 10,000 years ago, or 100,000 years ago, we have less words that we have now because we're constantly evolving and discovering how do we feel, how we relate to this world, and so on. So we're adding letters and concepts and words in our vocabulary, and it's a very normal process of human beings exploring themselves and evolution. So the biggest misconception of all this is because people say, oh, there are too many letters and now it is so confusing. But if there is a group of people who define themselves and say, oh, we feel like this, like we feel like being demisexual, yeah, and we didn't have a word before and we didn't know this feeling about, and now we have a word so we can relate to it and understand and explore. This is always, I think, a good thing, and it cannot diminish the importance of other letters or somehow there is no fight for power or so on. It is just many different identities that are coming up to the surface, and I hope that in the future there will be no problem, as well as there is no problem having so many letters in the alphabet.
That sounds
promising. How it is.
That sounds good. A little bit wrapping up. If we talk about the coming out as a person. We talked about we mentioned how situation started in Sweden, Georgia, and Moldova. But if we take the global perspective, we mentioned also Russia, how homophobias and other in Georgia and other are being used by Russia, or Russia is using it. We know how it works. But then we have this tendency in a global level. We have the United States, which of course is a major preoccupation for people. We have this Roe versus Wade, where abortion in practice is going to be stopped in a number of states. And there are a lot of worries that gay right might be the second thing on the agenda for the Supreme Court of the United States. For example, same-sex marriages, everything that's not fit into the conservative view of the family, so to speak. But on the other hand, we say, I mean, as we see here in Moldova, there is a liberalization going on. I can see the very positive things in Latin America, at least when it comes to women's rights. It's very strong in favor of abortion in countries like Mexico, Colombia, and Argentina. So we have positive trends, but we have this very conservative trend in the United States with the Supreme Court. So what do you think, and this is the million-dollar question, I know that, what do you think will happen on a global level? Are we into a very conservative move where you will expect backlashes on all liberal rights, including gay and rights and homosexual people's rights? Or what do you think will happen?
We should remember that nothing is guaranteed. We don't have guarantees. It can change any given moment, as we saw it in USA. And also, I believe that even it will have these more restrictive tendencies, it can change. During the Tbilisi Pride Festival, we had the hallway of queer icons, had these historical people, historical actions, historical movements who changed the situation for LGBTQI community. And then there was the Stonewall riots, and then the Born of Pride and the ballroom culture, Sylvia Rivera, Marsha Hanson and everything. And these people fought for these rights, and these people slowly, gradually changed it. And if the world turns back now, there will be some other new freedom fighters who can fight back these restrictive and repressive policies. For Georgia, I don't think that's happening. Of course, Georgian conservative and ultra-right movements will also try to jump on this trend, but we are still trying to protect women's rights, to have good legislation about domestic violence, anti-discrimination law on everything, and the abortion as such for the recent years has not been a problem. Also, we are seeing these tendencies in Europe, in Poland, in Hungary, anti-women's rights, anti-abortion, anti-LGBT, but I don't think that it will have like a huge effect on Georgia from my own perspective. But if it even would, I think that there are always people who would fight back and who would raise their voice against that, because we remember that this was not given to us. We fought for everything we have, like women, queer people, all the marginalized minority communities, and we are ready to fight again and again and again, although it's really tiring, but if there is no other choice.
Leo, what is your perspective? Are you also optimistic in the long run?
The rights can be taken away in every given moment, and we should be aware of this. I would not say that I'm an optimist or pessimist on this. I would rather say that what I'm seeing right now and what we all see, especially in Europe, in France, many other countries with these far-right movements that are getting more and more space in parliaments, it is important to educate and just work every single day to educate people, because we have a tendency to forget how it all starts. We have a tendency to forget how we acquired a right, and then it's so easy to just let it go. If we talk about European Union, for example, and all the Brexit situation, I coming from a country that doesn't have these privileges with free traveling and free economic space and so on. I live in Europe. I lived in France for several years. I was so grateful for it. I was sitting around and then speaking with young generation that don't even know how it works. They just adjust to the fact that it was always like this for them. Like it was always free circulation and economic and so on. So when Brexit happened, it was quite a shock, because many people didn't know how to react and didn't know the positive things about Europeans. I think there is a big danger that we forget how these rights were acquired, and then it will be easier to manipulate and take them away in the countries like United States and some European countries. And at the same time, we should create a narrative. I will speak as film director and scriptwriter. It's important to create a narrative, like to make movies and write fairy tales, and will be inclusive narrative. So the next generation will grow up with this understanding as a common, like basic knowledge about diversity. And if we have more people who has diversity in their blood, it will be easier to protect our rights.
So, giving the last words in this discussion to Gustav from the very liberal Sweden, I mentioned that the Swedish commander-in-chief was taking part in Pride. But what do you think on the global backlash? In Europe, we also have Hungary and Poland, which are aggressively against gay rights, especially in Hungary. Are you still optimistic in the long run?
I am. I think the world is getting better every time. And even when these things are happening, like you see in the United States, what's happening in France, in Sweden, I don't know if it was Spain, but like now these countries are talking about protecting abortion in the Supreme Court, and people are protecting these things really. And people in Iraq and other dictatorships, they are getting fire on their thing. But I think the world is getting better every time. And even when these things are happening, after some years, it's gone and you don't think about it anymore.
Great. I think that the optimistic words in the end. So I would like to thank you all for this discussion. And I say for those who hasn't been following us before, that we have been sitting in 4 different locations, which I think is part of this possibility to do things. Gustav is in Stockholm. I myself is actually in France now, even though I'm Swedish, and Tamar, you in Georgia, and Leo is in Moldova. So it's been really a global conversation. And I'd like to thank you so much, Gustav Åhlén in Sweden, Tamar Kapanadze in Georgia, and Leo Zbanke in Moldova. And this is Echolocation, which is a joint podcast between K News in Georgia and DS in Moldova and the Global Bar magazine in Sweden. And my name is David Isaacson, and we'll be back soon with the next episode. And then one of my colleagues or co-partners in this project from either Moldova or Georgia will be running the show. So thank you so much for taking part in the talk today. Thank you all.